Cool. We're live. I'm Josh Vogel. This is Franco Impellizzeri.
Perfect.
Did I do it?
Yes, it's
Awesome.
good.
Okay. Franco, do you mind introducing yourself real quick, and then we'll kind of continue with what we were just talking about?
Yeah, I'm now a professor at the University of Technology, Sydney. I teach research methods. I start my career as a coach, and I enter in research after my 30s, so in my second life. Basically, I'm interested in research. I became interested in research because as a coach, I had a lot of questions, and I hope to find in research the answers. I can tell you after 25 years that it didn't work so well, but that's the reason why I joined research. I'm not a typical academic. I joined the academia in 2018 when I moved here in Australia, in Sydney. And yeah, I'm interested in coaching, training, and research quality.
Okay. Well, so before the podcast started, just for people who are listening, we were talking about how, my goal for this podcast and a lot of the episodes that I've done so far, the topics generally aren't like, super controversial or like attention grabbing topics. But I think, my love is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that's, what I've put my life into. And I think that something that's missing from my sport and a lot of sports is an ability to understand how to interpret scientific research and how to know, like, do you mind if I curse a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, how do I know what's bullshit and what's not bullshit? How do I know who's maybe overselling certain scientific ideas or what research says, stuff like that? And, like, I think, you and I were just talking about how maybe scientific methodology and things like that might not be as like, maybe not as exciting, but I think it's something that's incredibly necessary. And I think it's very helpful to a lot of people in sport. So, that's kind of a big reason why I wanted to talk to you. Also, because your name keeps on coming up. Like when I talk to Yob or just, as I look around on the internet and I start to look into people who are interested in kind of, I don't know if cleaning up science is the right way to put it, but like doing very rigorous research and sticking to like very, I guess, clean science is a way to put it. And like, I keep on running into your name and also Stork. So I
Yeah.
figured you would be a good guy to talk to.
Yeah, I just would like to explain that why I'm interested in research quality, because some people always move the conversation towards a more academic discussion and say, yeah, but from a practical perspective, this doesn't really matter. Actually, it's exactly the opposite. The reason why I start to be interested in research is from a practical perspective, because imagine I'm a coach, I read a paper and say, oh, that's interesting. I want to try with my athletes. And maybe I also decide to cut some of the training I was doing to substitute with something I read on a paper. But what about if the paper is wrong? Because I'm cutting something I'm doing for a long time that more or less I'm familiar. I know how people respond to this kind of training. And immediately I switch to something else. And maybe this something else is wrong. So this is the reason why I started to be interested in research methodology, because I wanted to know if what I was doing based on research was really worth. And so it's very practical. It's not just an academic thing. Is the opposite.
Yeah.
And nowadays, because when I start to be interested in research quality, there were there were social media, but not as common as now, not as popular as now. And now, you publish a paper, the abstract appear on a post. Normally, authors try to emphasize their findings. Most of the time, they overinterpret the results. They don't acknowledge the limitations. Sometimes they say, "Yeah, but I wrote in the paper." Yeah, but now you are communicating on social media and people not necessarily read the paper. So maybe you have to be more transparent when you try to. So this is the reason why I'm interested. I try to talk about research quality. It's from a practical perspective. It's not just a theoretical or academic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, I don't come from a scientific background. Have a very low level of like academic education. I graduated high school and then I started working and I didn't go to any kind of college or university. And eventually I found my way into teaching Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And so, later I'll be 47 next month. So over the last like 23 or 24 years, I've put all my energy into jiu-jitsu and I've developed an interest in science. But, I'm starting from a low academic point. So when I look at science, it's from a very naive perspective. Like I might maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, I would see like a scientific paper and go, "Oh, that's a scientific paper. That must be legit. I'm just going to listen to what that says." And I trust my own personal experience as a coach, but it's like you said, um, where if if scientific research says something different than what I'm doing, then of course I want to pay attention to it. But because I have a low academic background, um, it's very difficult to know, you know, is this paper well done? Are the people who did the paper, respectable scientists? Are they people that I should listen to? Is the paper telling me something that is useful for my sport? And I think a lot of coaches in my situation run into that problem where, like, maybe they see a paper directly and they don't know how to interpret it or how strong it is. And then even worse, they see on social media somebody, maybe like a clickbait site says like, this paper says Brazilian jiu-jitsu breathing exercises will make you, be able to grapple for 10 minutes longer in every training session or something like that, and you get hyped up and you think like, oh, well, science says it, so it must be legit. But then when you start digging a little bit deeper and you find that things are more complicated than that, it can be hard to tell the difference between what's real and what's
Yeah,
overstated.
of course, you can always do some cherry picking when you want to support your idea, and that's one of the thing I have discussed a lot in the last years. And but imagine you have 10 studies, 8 showing no effect, the 2 showing an effect, and you just focus on those 2. Unless you are the kind of person that try to track down all the studies in that area, you may think, oh, the literature is strong. There are 2 studies supporting this, but while there are much more not supporting that. I now simplify a bit because you don't want to count the studies, because what about if you have 2 studies showing it doesn't work and 8 studies showing it works, but the 8 studies are very bad and the 2 studies are very good. So you don't you don't want to count. You want to balance the quality of the studies with their findings, and this is where things become much more complicated because as as for everything you need some technical knowledge. And the education is not really a barrier in my opinion, because uh, most researchers run poor studies, and I don't want to look harsh, but this is actually showing the literature. So it's not only an opinion; is backed up by some evidence. But they have a PhD, they have a degree, and but still they produce low quality research, and this is for different reasons. One is also the pressure from the academic system to publish a lot, so you try to you focus on quantity and on quality, but still understanding whether a study is worth to be considered is not that easy. And nowadays, with the social media, it's becoming even more and more complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only reason I mentioned the academic background is just because, like, when I do look at a study, I might see an abstract, and then you'll see all these like research methods, and then there's statistics, and there's all these things. And so when I look at this stuff, I've gotten enough tips to kind of get a rough idea of maybe what I'm looking at a little bit, but then I start to wonder, okay, well, what's a p value, and what is? And then you start to read about that, and then you're like, oh wow, this is more complicated than I thought. And then there's statistics for this and statistics for that. So then there's a math background that's helpful, and then there's, when you look more into it online, then there's like maybe a bit of philosophy of science stuff going on that might be helpful to know about, and a bit of logic, like you pointed out to me when we were talking privately. Um, and so I find that like the more interested I get in this stuff, the more building blocks I feel like I'm missing. And so I wonder, like, I mean, there's a practical point where like I don't really need to read about, everything that Karl Popper ever wrote to like understand a paper and like teach jujitsu. But I think maybe there's a certain amount of digging that's helpful for me to do as a coach, but it's hard to
Yeah.
tell where that like how far do you go, you know?
Well, that's I a few years ago I changed completely my subject that now is much less technical. So, for example, I cut out most of the statistical part, and I added two modules on philosophy of science and logic. Because the problem is that if you fail when you design a study in these first steps, so the question is not logical or is not supported logically, the question is unclear, for example, has a low degree of falsifiability. So you cannot really falsify because you can adjust this theory more or less to everything, and we are plenty in sport of this kind of theories. If you fail that, it doesn't matter what statistic approach you use. The study will be poor anyway. So if I have to, because I actually did that for a master in high performance. And people ask me why in a master for high performance you focus on this, let's say, theoretical. I say, well, because when you work with athletes, is actually you have to apply logic most of the time and common sense. You can really rely on a study immediately. Maybe you can take some time to read more, but you have to make decisions, and decisions can be helped by the use of logic. Philosophy of science can help you understanding not if the methods are correct, but if the question, the way that they frame the question, makes sense. And if you see there something not really working, is a red flag that probably also the rest is not really relevant for you. So because normally what researchers do is to try to convince you in the initial part of the paper that what they are doing is relevant, which is not that easy. It's not enough to say, oh, that's very important. You have to explain why you think is important. And I would say most of the time you see there that there's something not working, because they jump here and there, which means it's more likely than not an academic exercise and not really a study to answer a proper question. And uh, just as a when I introduced myself, I forgot to say that I come from combat sports, uh, because I was a taekwondo athlete, and my son is a boxer. But it's
Very cool.
my area is in reality is combat sport where I came from, um, and in combat sports, it's even more complex than other sports. I know it's not nice to compare sports, but I say there are factors that there aren't in other sports, like anxiety, but it's not the anxiety you have before a soccer game. It's you are scared. You may be hurt. So it's a different kind of stress, and this, in my opinion, has a role when you think about training for this kind of events, and that cannot be ignored. You can be physically super well trained, but if you don't have some other skills, psychological skills, it doesn't really matter. I know probably for you in in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the same. You may see people in the gym super performant, they are great, and when they are competing, they are not that great because there are other factors. So what's the point? You may be super strong, super trained, but if you miss that part, you will not excel in that sport anyway. And so, for example, I'm interested in understanding how the physical components can help other components. So when I train for some sports, one against one sports, I use physical training to train, for example, psychological aspects. And people ask me, why are you using this kind of training? Because the physiological profile of the sport doesn't require this. I say, well, I don't. Yeah, I don't give a shit about the physiological profile here. I just using to, for example, to make them tougher, to train them to suffer, to push a bit more in some situations. So it's not really physical, but this is part of the training. Training, you have to cover a lot of aspects, not just being a bit stronger. Is not that can help, of course, but it's not the only thing that matters. So even when you read a study, you have to ask yourself how what you're reading and how the training strategies that the study seems to suggest is really relevant in your sport, and whether is worth to, for example, cut some other part of training to substitute with something new. Because as I said, maybe you have a tough training to make people tougher. You cut some part to do breathing exercise. I don't want to enter in that area, but fine, you can do it, but you are cutting something else. So you have to consider the cost benefit. Is the cost of cutting that part and substituting with this one worth or isn't? And what about if it's wrong? I always say people consider that you may be wrong and the study may be wrong. So this is how you evaluate the risk benefit. So if I introduce this and I'm wrong, what can happen? Because sometimes say, okay, even if I'm wrong, yeah, maybe I waste a little time, but it doesn't affect the overall training program. But sometimes the changes are invasive, so you are actually changing a lot of your training process. So is it worth? So you have to consider that the study may be wrong, because the study may be wrong by almost definition. I try to explain this concept. Um, Imagine that you have a training that has increased strength by 5%, for example. This is a bit technical, but just to try to make this concept clear. Um, you need to run a study, and you want that the study give you this 5%, which is the effect of the training. This is the true effect. The problem is that every time you run a study, there's some variability coming from different sources. Can be the sample that you are using, the noise of the measurements. So you have a noisy measure, a noisy estimation, which means there is an error first. Second, imagine that you run a study and you find a result. If you repeat that study, let's say 100 times, you will not always find 5%. You will find 2%, 1%, 8%, because the studies work in the long run, meaning that if you repeat the study 100 times, 1,000 times, on average, you should be able, if everything is perfect, to find that 5%. But when you run one study, you don't know if you are very close to this 5% or you're far, because this is how the results of the study distribute. So you run 100 times, sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 3. When you distribute the result of these 100 studies, you, on average, you find, if everything is perfect, 5% on average. But you can't calculate the average because you're running one study. So normally the studies present the uncertainty, which is the error. So all the points within this error are possible because you can find, let's say, 8%, and you have an error that goes from 1 to, I don't know, 15%. And you know that somewhere, now I'm simplifying, but you know that somewhere is there the true effect, but you don't know exactly where. That's why it's important to consider the uncertainties of the studies. So this just to explain that even if everything is perfect, you have one study which is called realization, and you don't know the average of that sample in that study if it's how close it is to the true value. So every time you have a study, even if it's properly done, you should consider the uncertainty. As if the uncertainty is 1%, the lowest level, it may be that the training is not effective, or the effect is negligible. So something that is not really relevant. And that's possible. You can't say no. It's possible. It's statistically possible. So when you want to understand whether to introduce something that you read in the literature, you should consider the error. That's my point. And what I question also some colleagues is that they normally don't make this uncertainty explicit, and they create too much expectations. It's like I question the use of Nordic, not the use. I question the literature on Nordic hamstrings to prevent injuries, and I question because I recalculate I remeta-analyze some studies, and the uncertainty is very large. So I didn't say, and I couldn't say they don't work, but I said we don't know actually, because the results of the studies are compatible even with increasing the injury risk. That's the uncertainty we have, and you can't exclude that part because it's convenient or because it doesn't fit your narrative. So in my discussions, I said, you need to be honest. You have to say, people, look, it seems to work, but the results are uncertain. So you can't exclude that they can be even worse or not effective. And people can make an informed decision. This is how you make an informed decision, when you know the truth, not when people try to hide the limitations of their studies or the uncertainty of their results to push. Because, of course, it's much better and has more impact to say, oh, do that, you cut half the injury risk. And besides, when you say cut half the injury risk, it's so strong as a claim that you people realize quite soon that it doesn't work that way. Because I mean, you can fake data, you can work around, spin the results, but the reality is what we live every day. So over time, people realize there's something wrong.
Yeah,
So
people keep on getting hurt.
yeah, exactly. Because if you start to implement, you have even higher injuries. It's not because they are not effective. It's because it's much more complicated than that. It's, as you can imagine, people always say, "Oh, everything is multifactorial." Yes, and you with one exercise, you pretend to reduce the injuries with one exercise, 30 repetition. It's too good to be true.
Yeah.
And when it's too good to be true, that's another red flag.
Yeah, so too good to be true. Um, Overstating what something says, making
Yeah.
it sound more certain than it really is. Is it okay if, something you said a couple minutes ago was really interesting. You mentioned that you're interested in like the intersection of physical training with like mental states or emotional kind of factors. Do you mind like talking a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this is actually a conversation I had several times with Job also, because the reason why I start to work more and more with Job is, first, Job is a very honest researcher, so he acknowledged the limitation. He also acknowledged the limitation of the theory on which some studies are based, because the theory are sometimes are reverse engineering. So you have something, you see something, and you try to explain what you saw, creating a theory, which is okay to start with the theory, but after you should test if the theory is correct. And this is where also researchers sometimes, most of the times, they make mistakes. But um, training is so. Why do we train the physical components in, especially in technical sports, where the technique and the tactics is important? The way I see as a coach, I never pretended to be the one making influencing in a way the physical components in a way that my athletes could win. I give you an example. I was training the fencing team for the Swiss national team. Um, it's a it's a very technical sport. It's very tactical. So my view is first, the best I can do as a strength and conditioning coach is to train people so that they can express their technical and tactical potential. But they need that potential, and someone has to develop that potential eventually. So my work is a bit marginal in in a way, because I can just allow the athletes to express the potential. Because if you, what people don't understand, when you are fatigued, you change your tactical approach. So you don't do the same thing as you do in the first round. So you have to manage your stamina. You want to find breaks to recover. So the physical condition influence your behaviors, and in sport, your tactical and also technical behaviors. So you pick a technique that is less physical demanding and all these kind of things. So when you are fatigued, you basically are restricting the range of the possibilities you have, because you start to pick the one that fit that condition in that exact moment. But if you are less fatigue and you are physically more prepared, you have more options. And these more options may give you some competitive advantage. So this is the reason why I train the physical components in these sports. You may be stronger, but it's not because the maximum strength is higher that, in my opinion, can make a difference, but just because it can delay the fatigue. Um, Now I'm trying to generalize. Of course, being a bit stronger is maybe helpful, but overall is just to increase the general fitness in a way that you can support your tactical and technical behavior. The second aspect is psychological, especially. Of course, I'm influenced. I'm biased because I come from combat sports, and combat sports are tough, are difficult. Psychologically, they are really, really difficult. And people use different strategies to cope with this mental stress that every athlete has. Even the most aggressive is they face their fear with this kind of behavior. It's not because they don't really care. Um, Unless there are some psychopaths, but normally they care about being hurt, about losing, so they have stress and anxiety. So the way you cope with that is very personal. I had my ways, other people had their ways. So you can't uh, mm, take the physical components and separate from these aspects, because they are part of the human of the athlete. So sometimes you want to create some challenging conditions using physical stimulus. Uh, you you want to induce fatigue. You want to push very hard training, and you want them to suffer a bit, because you want to get used to push a bit more, and because that attitude is what can make a difference in a competition. I usually explain. I had some athletes. I was using some weightlifting exercise. They didn't want to do it, and they say, "Now you have to try." There was a back and forth, and in the end, they try. And I don't even say if they fail or succeed, because that was not the point. The point is that you have to try, because I said you can lose an Olympic game for 1 point, and that 1 point is maybe because you just didn't try. So sometimes you have to try. I hope it's clear what I want to say. I use physical components to try to help them to develop this kind of attitude. Of course, it's my personal approach, my opinion. I'm not pretending that this can be generalized, but this is a bit to explain how I approach coaching, how I approach training physical components, and also how I try to interpret the literature, the scientific literature. So sometimes I read a paper, say, yeah, I increased 3% strength, but who cares in reality? So I don't use that kind of study, because that's not the study I'm really interested in. I'm looking for something else, like how to keep a general condition high over a longer period if people have to compete often, or if in some combat sports they have the qualifications, and after they have the different rounds. So that's a different kind of effort. And for example, now in few months there is a tournament here where people start to fight in the morning and the final is in the evening. So in that situation, you have to think how to make them uh, uh, physical prepare so that they can cope with a hold them. And of course, the worst case scenario is the best case scenario, that they arrive in the final. So, but this is what normally you prepare. But in that case, I think the approach to physical training changed, not because the physiological profile of the sport changed, but it changed in relation to the context. So these are the adaptations, and these are normally things that you don't find in the literature. You have to rely on your coaching experience. And I always say, don't underestimate your coaching experience. Don't underestimate. Now people are afraid. I know a lot of good coaches say, "Oh, do you know if there is a study showing this?" And say, "Why?" Because maybe people question what, and they say, "You don't give a shit what they say. Just train." The good part in sports is that in the end of the day, you have results, and you can't fake the results. And by results, I don't mean reaching the UFC or winning the world championship. This can be also in your local area. You have athletes on average that perform quite well. Um, the consistency of, let's say, average results for me is a good result, because it means you have a system that allow most of your athletes to be good. Because to have the champion, you need someone with the gift, let's say.
Yeah, a lot of special
And
conditions come together.
yeah, and you can't do that. You can't control that. Tomorrow in your gym can enter the future world champion. You don't know, and this is by chance in some ways. It's not necessarily by chance, but is most part by chance. I'm saying not necessarily by chance, because that's the paradox. I had a very good mentor for coaching that was my former boss that unfortunately passed away. He always told me the best coach is the one that can pick the right athlete. Um, and I realized over time working with him that was true. I always use this example. I tell you again, when I was working this private research center. Basically, I started my activity in a private research center, sport research center, um, created by a company sponsoring athletes. So the idea of the company that made a lot of sense was, we give millions to sponsor athletes, teams, and so on. We want to take care of our investment. And the way they thought to take care of their investment is to develop a sports science center. So they said we can provide, all the last technologies, scientific support, all these kind of things. So this is how I enter in this area. But our main job was to train people because the sponsor wanted them to to win, to give visibility. So, and we were under the marketing. So just to explain how my view was shaped by all these contextual factors. So I'm very pragmatic. So I know that I have to win because the sponsor want to have a visibility to, which is a return on investment, all these kind of things that we can't be too romantic and say, yeah, but sport survive most of the time because of the money. Maybe small money, but you need some money because otherwise you can't survive. And this is the reality. So when you work in that area, you have to consider the reality, not just the dreams. I would like a different world, but we are not in a different world. So that's why I became very, sometimes I would say also a bit cynical, but I'm quite pragmatic.
Well, and
So,
sponsor, yeah, I mean, like you said, sponsors want results if for their product, if they're giving you money for,
of
yeah.
course, and this is also why, even when there are, especially in MMA, there are events that people complain, say, yeah, I mean, I don't like either, but in the end of the day, if people like it, they are giving what people like. So complain with people eventually, not with the organizers, not necessarily with the organizers. But my point was that when I was there, the sponsor every year decided to sponsor, I don't know, the track and field team, marathon runners, and we had to switch to train a different sport. So the first time I trained a marathon runner, I had zero experience in training marathons. So they told me, there are these athletes. I'm the one that will train these athletes. You can train these ones. So, well, but I have no idea. I said, oh, I'll read something around. I said, fucking hell, how can I do that?
Did you ever run there
So
before, or you were just going in completely like brand new to it?
brand new. It was. I come from track and free and field also, but it was sprinting and hard those long jumps. So nothing. Anything to do with running. But anyway, the point I wanted to make is that I actually trained, and my athlete won an important marathon, national at national level. And you may say, "Oh, so you are a good coach in the end." This is likely for me not how I interpret that result. When I saw the athletes winning, I said, "Fuck." uh, that athlete is so strong that won despite my training, and because there's no way that my first attempt was perfect. Indeed, I check all the personal records, and actually that athlete was very strong. So even not performing at their peak, they were on average better than the others. I mean, I should have been very bad not to win. And indeed, he won with a very, for based on the records, one of the worst actually time to complete the marathon. So I had the right athlete. That's why I, and why I'm saying that is because sometimes you say people, oh, these are good coaches. They always train good athletes. Yeah, but you don't know because maybe this coach is famous, so this coach attracts the best athletes. So
Yeah, that happens to a lot.
this is a selection bias, what in research we call selection bias. So the best come to you and ask you to be trained, but normally they are already quite good.
Yeah.
So you don't have to take yourself too seriously. Sometimes you have to be very realistic. Otherwise, you start to think you are much better than you really are, and you stop learning. So don't. It's not enough to have results. This is a bit to say the results are important, but you have to be careful how you read your results. But if I see someone here local in Sydney training boxers. Maybe they don't have the national champion, but they have always very good performance when you go to contests, to tournaments. You see their athletes performing well in a constant way. I normally think there is something behind, because when there is no system, you have this very bad, very good, or it's very the variability is very large when the system is not under control. When it's under control, the variability decreases. So for me, it's an indicator of good coaching, having this consistency in the way your athletes, not necessarily if they all win or things like that. Because when you have this consistency, I can see a system. I can also imagine that the day that this great talent entering your gym, you can reach a high level and good top results. Yeah. So this is how a bit I see the coaching, the area of coaching. It's not related necessarily to research, but just I wanted to share with you. That's my view on that.
It makes sense though, and I think maybe I mean, maybe there's consistent themes there, right? Like, if there's some emphasis on results, like for example, in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, like there's competitive results, and then there's business results. Like if you own a jiu-jitsu gym and maybe you have very low injury rates and you have very little student turnover, like people generally stay because they're enjoying themselves and stuff like that. Those are pretty good results. And if they do well in tournaments consistently over a long period of time, and with generations of students, that's pretty good results. And that seems almost like a way of holding yourself accountable and not getting maybe delusional about what you're doing practice wise. Maybe it's not so dissimilar from like falsifiability in science, where maybe you have an idea and you can kind of say like, okay, well, I think we're on the right track with the way that we train jujitsu, and let's test that and see if that actually is true, or if we're just completely off base and we're doing everything wrong.
Yeah, that's yeah. What I want to say is that I give a lot of weight to logic and rational approaches, regardless your background. The reason why I start and I like to work with Job, other than as a person, as as a fantastic person, is that I start to chat about what I was doing as a coach. So without any scientific background, as I told you, I start to be interested in research after my 30s. So until then, I was mainly coaching. Yeah, I had a degree, but was yeah, a physical education a degree. Yeah. The Taekwondo at that time was very traditional, so the way the training was structured was fixed. Doing something different was seen as going against the tradition.
Okay.
And what I did actually was to go against the tradition in so much that in the end I had to give up and I had to close my gym. But uh, because, for example, for combat sports, uh, fighting is important. You can't just train, generically in the gym and go to the competition. So I started to do much more sparring. That was not but real sparring, not just movie kind sparring. Because I was thinking, there's no way. The best way to reproduce something closer to a competition is to have my athletes fighting in the gym, and it's okay, but it's the closest thing. So I increase a lot sparring, and actually, I start to have results, and I think it was as simple as that. They just were much more used to fight. And this is what gave an advantage, while the others needed years to accumulate all this experience. So every time there was a competition, I was there instead of going 2, 3 times. We we participate to tournament. anytime I had the possibility. So at the same, let's say, level in terms of years of experience and so on, they had much more experience and they start to win almost everything in my area. Um,
But how
it,
interesting, right? Because, like, as I mean, this is years ago, right? Like when you were
yeah,
in your 30s.
25 years ago was even
Yeah.
30 years ago.
And, like, you probably think about this and you're like, well, it's so obvious. If I just want them to get good at fighting, then I'm going to have them do a lot of fighting and compete a lot, right? But maybe at the time, because that was not the traditional way of doing things, it just didn't seem obvious at all. And you were just kind of like, how can I make these guys good? But it's interesting.
Yeah, it seems logical, but when I start to speak with Job, because I always had this skill acquisition is not my area, so I ask Job, "What do you think?" And they say, "Yeah, makes sense." I mean, it's too far. Otherwise, it's too far from the competition profile. Just training the techniques in isolation or in a very close skill environment, all these kind of things. And I was happy because oh, so maybe I wasn't wrong after all. Uh, but after that, we started to elaborate a bit because the difficult part in sparring is that you can't reproduce the anxiety and the tension you have during a real competition. So these change again a lot. So, but for example, you can have a more exchange with other gyms in boxing. I see it's used a lot. So my son used to go to different gyms asking if they can do some sparring. So you don't spar always with the same people you know very well, and you're out to drink something after the training is not the same. But these aspects, in my opinion, are important, as important or even more important than the training physical components. So, in the training of an athlete like that, you have to think about all these aspects. If you just focus on making them stronger, uh, it's okay, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
And coaching is not just focusing. Coaching, in my opinion, is it means having a general overview of the problem and try to find different solutions for different problems, knowing that some solution may interact with others. So that's the complexity of a coach. But that's normal. Otherwise, everyone would be able to coach and would be a good coach. But there are good coach and bad coach. In my opinion, these are the things that differentiate one coach from the others. And
Yeah.
that's normal. It's like a surgeon. There's
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
is better than the others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's interesting, the thing that you were saying, I guess we're kind of circling back to the idea of the physical training affecting, emotional abilities and cognitive abilities and stuff like that. And, you know, with combat sports, you also mentioned, and this is definitely true from my experience, that like there's a lot of anxiety that goes into it. Like, if you're doing striking, you're going to get punched a lot and that hurts and that's not a good feeling. And if you're doing jujitsu, there's a chance that somebody's going to like grab your arm and straighten it real quick or choke you or twist your shoulder or something like that. And, it can be scary and there's a certain amount of anxiety. And um, so what you were saying about physical practices, like physical conditioning and mental skills working together, like one of the interesting things that I started doing with some of my students when they're doing their very first jiu-jitsu tournament, we do a lot of simulation matches. Like, we do our normal training on the training floor where we spar with each other every day and all that kind of stuff. But then we'll go to a separate room and do like simulation matches. And even that, there's a little bit more anxiety, but it's not the same as competing. And you don't get that same like adrenaline dump that you get in the first 30 seconds. So one of the tricks that I started doing like years ago was I would have them do 10 burpees in a row. And then the second that they're done with the 10th burpee, slap hands and start their match with their partner. And what happens is, if you've ever done burpees before, that feeling of finishing your burpees and then I can't breathe, the adrenaline dump.
Yeah.
It's so similar a feeling. So I started using that as a way to like recreate the adrenaline dump feeling so that they can get a sense of what it feels like when they do their first competition match. And yeah, it's
Yeah,
so interesting, like talking to you about that.
makes sense. But this is where, um, uh, of course, I don't have a solution for this problem, but identifying the problem is the first step. So let's say we sit together and say, how can we reproduce some sort of tension, even if we know, because the competition is where you want to is your reference, but and so you want to be closer. That's the point. You can't be there until you don't compete in an official tournament, but you want to be closer. So the point is, how do we go closer? For example, maybe like you said, under fatigue, sparring with another athlete who is not fatigued. So you know that now uh, you have an opponent who's not fatigued, and this may create a bit more tension and anxiety. Say, "Fuck, I'm tired, and now I have is fresh." So, but understanding the problem you want to solve is the only way to try to find the solution. I always say that, I mean, we have to agree about the problem that we want to solve before finding a solution. If we ignore the problem or we try to work around the problem, it doesn't work because the problem is still there.
Yeah,
So we need to understand the problem and find a solution, which is another critical point because most people, let's say, are good to find problems but not solution, and they are just people finding problems, so they just argumentative. That's the difference between being constructive and argumentative. I mean, you have to find a problem after you sit and you start to think, okay, what can we do now? What's what solution we can try? There's no perfect solution, but it's something you want to address in a way or in another. So th- this is where logic plays an important role. How do you? There is not even science there. It's logic. Besides, if you develop a solution that is logically strong, it means has also a higher degree of falsifiability, which means you can run a study to examine that solution specifically. While this is the problem of research, when the problem is vague, ambiguous, it doesn't really, from a scientific perspective, you can't really answer that question. I can see there are plenty of studies where they find something that is not what they mentioned at the beginning, but they turn in a way that seems to support their. So they just, you know, play with the findings, or there are 20 comparison, there are two significant, and they say, "Oh, you see, it works here." And normally I say, "Yeah, but in the other 18, it doesn't work. So maybe that two is by chance." So you can, but you don't. People don't normally present this as a limitation because the approach should be we didn't find anything. We actually found a couple of variables that are influenced by this training, but considering we have compared 20 variables or 10 variables, it may be just by chance. That would be the correct way to report that kind of finding. So if you read the paper, you see that it didn't work on these 18. The authors are telling you it didn't work for these 18. It just worked for these two. We don't know if it's actually a true effect or just by chance, because the more comparison you make, the higher is the risk to find something that is significant, but just by chance. And so you decide whether to use that training in relation to the results, knowing that this finding may be just due, I say chance to make things clear, but it depends on the random variability, other things. But let's say by chance is enough to communicate this concept, and after it's up to you. This is what I complain with a lot of researchers. You don't have to make a decision for me. You need to give me the information so that I can make a decision. You don't have to tell me do it or don't do it. You say this is what we found. These are the limitations. Now it's up to you to decide if it's worth. There are situations in which the same cost has different benefit. If you are in the For example, you are in the qualification phase for a tournament. You may not want to risk too much because you want to save yourself for the final if you are going to the final. So it depends. Or sometimes you say, not, I don't have a lot of chance to go to the final. Try to go as far as I can. I mean, it depends. It depends. When I was competing at the beginning, I was focusing on the next match in the tournament and the next competition. When I start to become a bit better, I start to think, okay, I have to be careful. I'm winning. I don't do too much because otherwise I arrive at the final that I'm destroyed. It happens that sometimes you don't arrive to the final, but you start to think differently.
Yeah.
And, and these are all important aspects to consider when we talk about high performance, especially in combat sports that are, in my opinion, they have additional layer of difficulties in the whole process. And there are no secret methods. There's nothing, no secrets to. You have to navigate the uncertainty of the process. That's the only thing you can do.
But what if I use this breathing exercise? I'm just teasing.
I was actually answering
Deep breathing.
seriously.
I know. I can see the wheels turning. Like, how do I answer the breathing exercise thing?
No, the point again. The point is no, but in general is why you're using some techniques. As I said, it depends on the context. I was in a situation I can't say because it was a famous artist, but I was in a situation in which there was the last competition where um, we these athletes could win or lose basically. In some sports, being second, you anyway, people don't care, and these athletes had some back problem. So he asked his personal masseur, and we were abroad. Say, fuck, we have to go in Italy to pick this masseur, organize everything. And we asked, but who is this guy? Because we never heard. So basically, it was a builder that, as a second job, used to do this some tricky things. That was absolutely bullshit. But what do you do in that situation? You have the last competition where you have bet everything. So if you fail that, you lose the whole 20 days of, it was an event of 20 days. So what do you do that?
Yeah. Yeah. The
And
athlete
you
needs.
know what we did? We went in Italy. We picked that masseur and we moved there, and not necessarily because we think it works
But
or
maybe the
was really.
athlete feels better, right?
Yeah, in that moment, we didn't want to give the other any excuse to say, we want to have our athletes convinced it was in the best shape to. So you do it. So in that situation, of course, I wouldn't make a reel saying this was the reason why he won, because actually was one of the reason. Actually, he didn't win anyway, but yeah, it could be one of the reason, but not because it's effective per se, but just because it contributed to make psychologically better our athletes. So in that situation, in high level sport, you can't do this shit because
Yeah.
you have to win.
Yeah. Maybe he has his like favorite pair of sneakers. It's the same thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You don't want to say no. And for the final, you don't use it because it's a bullshit. You say use what the fuck you want, as long as you win,
Yep.
it's
Just win.
fine.
We can talk about it later. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. So you were a taekwondo athlete when you were younger, and have you continued in sport like for yourself at all? Do you still practice?
Well, that's an interesting part because I grew up competing, so I always connected my training with the competition. When I stopped to compete, I lost motivation to train. So for and also because other problems, as I told you, the way I approach training coaching was a little bit different. So for a while, I didn't do anything because I said, why I have to train? I mean, I don't have any competition. Um, the second is also, in combat sports, especially when you have categories, I spend my teenage, the first part of my life dieting, because at that time they push you very low, and there were no nutritionists. The only thing you did was you just didn't eat,
Yeah.
and you train hard without eating. So it was really, really tough. So after I wanted to close my gym, I also stopped training, and I came back training later. But I never. I left taekwondo completely. I box a bit. I did some other combat sports. That's why I can tell you that in grappling I'm really bad. Uh, I mean, I grew up as a striker, basically. So, yeah.
No, I get it.
Eh,
I'm a terrible striker, so I understand.
uh, no,
Um,
I mean, for example, that's important because it's the feeling making me uncomfortable. I don't like when I have someone on my face. I mean,
yeah.
it's a different feeling. But I can tell you this. I had a very good friend, an artist that we actually published a paper together. She was a skeleton rider. Skeleton is in winter sport, the one going down with the face in front of the sled.
But yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
Is
I
it
mean, you
like
see,
skiing or like
yeah.
on
So,
skis?
yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, you are very fast with your head in front. And I asked her, but do you ski? She said, no, I'm scared. I said, you're scared of skiing? I mean, you're a skeleton. I mean, if something goes wrong, I mean, you can be hurt a lot. And they said, now, because in skeleton, I'm very close to the ground,
Yeah,
and skiing I don't like that feeling. So even if she came from a sport which is actually, in my opinion, more dangerous, um, she was scared about skiing.
yeah,
So, and this is actually something that if you want to have them performing well, maybe they have a talent in that sport, but they have that feeling. Training, when you train, you have also to try to do something for that. Or if you want to introduce in that sport. So it's always a matter of perspectives.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting for me because I grew up skateboarding. So since I was like 8 or 9 years old, I grew up skateboarding, and in skateboarding, it's at least when I was growing up, it was not a formal sport at all. It was just you go out, you try to figure out tricks, you fall down, you crack your head, get back up. It's very informal, and it's fun. And I still skateboard, but in my 20s, I got into jiu-jitsu. And when I got into jiu-jitsu, I started competing when I was about 23, 24, 25, something like that. And then I stopped for about 9 years because I just hated competing. I didn't like it. I had a bad relationship with it. And, but I still kept on doing jujitsu because, I love the sport and it was my profession and all that kind of stuff. And then about 4 years ago, I tried to start competing again. So I started competing, and, I do it maybe 3 times a year, 4 times a year. Um, but it's interesting because what you said about your connection between training and competition, um, I find that in I'm developing that in a positive way. Like when I first started competing in my 20s, I looked at it kind of like an extension of skateboarding. Like I'm going to get to do this thing and go to a competition and see if I can do these tricks on this person. Like let's see if I can do this choke to this guy or something. Like the same way I used to skateboard. And when I stopped and then I started competing again in my 40s, I started building a stronger connection between like, okay, I'm training for this competition. I'm preparing, it's a much stronger connection, which is what you mentioned that you had. And I think I understand what you're saying about, like, motivation when the connection's broken, and so that's something that I personally kind of struggle a little bit with, where, like, if I'm not doing a competition for, like, 6 months or 8 months, I have to shift my mindset so that I get back into, like, having fun with the sport instead of it being tied to something, specific like a tournament. It's a hard mental thing to balance, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's, I actually, I think I could reach some good results without training, and this actually shaped the way I see training. When one of my area of research is training load monitoring, these kind of things. Um, I I'm a bit. I mean, as also as a coach, I tend to train hard people, um, and is not that physiologically. Yes, maybe I should be a bit. I should cut. I should have cut what I did, but this is how you live a sport personally, and the way I live some sports at least is as a selective process. So you want to select people and have the one, let's say, that you want to push to compete at a different level. You want to have the one that have the attitudes and the skills to be at that level. And so if you can't train hard, in my opinion, you don't have any chance. Even if you have some good skills, in my opinion, you don't have any chance. So I want to that you understand whether you have the attitudes to reach that level, and I want to understand if I have to invest time or waste time in that person. So for me, it's a lot of things that we talk about training load. Like training smarter, not harder. In my opinion, I understand the intention, the spirit of this, but I almost always consider a bit of a bullshit because you need to train hard and smart. It's not that one is the opposite of the other. Because if you want to compete, you have to train hard. Because I was speaking with another person and said this should be reframed as um, I don't want to use bad words on the podcast. You
I mean, I don't
training,
mind.
yeah, it's not training smarter, not harder. Is training smarter, not like a dickhead. That was my that
Yeah,
was the way I used to reframe it because when people say, yeah, because if you train too hard, you don't recover this kind of thing. Yeah, but that's the point. It's not training hard. Is that you have to train hard in a smart way, so
yeah,
that because it's not that hard. It's just volume for me. Because small high intensity training is hard. I mean, it's or all out part. But if you recover properly between sets and between days, you can do it. So the message they want to give, and that's why I don't usually say that. I'm saying this now to you, but uh, you don't have to train too much, and you have to consider that's. I agree with that, but people may misinterpret and saying, "Oh, maybe." This happened to me sometimes with some others, and yeah, but maybe we are training too much. And why are you saying that? Are you having you recover? I say, no, I feel well, but so no, that's actually you have to train hard in a smart way. I mean, respecting the recovery phases, adjusting based on how they are tolerating the training, all these kind of things. So this is how I see training. Training is a stimulus, as a physiological stimulus. I have to provide the stimulus. Not necessarily is like with training. Maybe you don't want to reach failure every time. This kind of things is fine, but still, if I want to train strength, I need an important load, mechanical load to induce a stimulus, especially if you are an advanced athlete. So yeah, this sometimes this kind of very generic low intensity. circus-like training is, in my opinion, it doesn't make any sense also from a logical perspective. And this is where yoga, for example, can provide much more contextual knowledge in terms of science. There's no way this exercise can have any transfer to real competition. They are so far so different, and people think that I train my coupling perception and after, and that's bullshit. That will never happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had to do your sport.
Yeah. And do it hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Now, it's interesting because, I mentioned that I took a break for about 9 years from competing, and so when I was younger, I think I had some really stupid ideas about training where not I was an okay competitor, and I did pretty well, like, regionally and, in some, like, national level tournaments, I did pretty well, but, um, I had a lot of bad ideas, and, a lot of it was just, like, kind of some of the stuff that you were saying, like, I didn't train. I would train maybe lower intensity a lot and not train. I think I had a bad view about training hard, and I didn't have a lot of focus. I didn't understand recovery and all these things. And so when I started competing again in my 40s, um, I found that because I don't have the same energy that I used to have to train in my 20s and 30s, like I have to train hard to prepare for tournaments, especially like top level tournaments in my age group. Um, but a lot of the bad ideas that I had and the bad mindsets that I had about competing when I was younger, I can't afford to have those anymore. And in my 40s, I find that it's so much easier to see those bad mindsets because I'm working with so much less energy than I used to have in my 20s and 30s. Like, not less energy in the sense of like when I was 25, I could sleep like 3 hours straight, and then wake up
yeah,
the day
I know.
and then eat like a bunch of fried eggs and bacon and then just compete and do like a tournament, like a bunch of different divisions and like 5, 7 matches, whatever. And it was no problem. And, now that I'm 46, 47, I have to be very careful about my sleep. I have to be very careful about training intensely, but making sure that I recover properly. And if I'm going to spend a bunch of money to go fly somewhere and compete in a big tournament, I can't afford to have bad ideas about training or the way I'm going to approach strategy or what techniques I'm going to use. Like, I have to be very careful about all that stuff now. Whereas when I was younger, I didn't really have to be careful. So it's an interesting,
Yeah, that's
yeah, it's weird. It's weird competing in your 40s.
yeah. I mean, yeah, and the things change, and but you can adjust and adapt it to these changes. Is yeah, as everything is like. Uh, Probably you are a coach, so you know what I'm talking about. Is the tactical approach to a competition depends on your characteristics. Um, and I was speaking with my son. He doesn't move a lot. He could move more, but my son is like me. I had a decent stamina, but not great. And despite I trained the aerobic component as much as I could, it was never like others. So I couldn't. I needed to be much more efficient also when I compete to save some stamina. So sometimes tactically you cannot do things like, for example, coach are asking you to do because you don't have the physical capacity for that. That's not enough to train. People think that you can train everything. It's not. If you are, I was quite mm, explosive in terms of powerful, but I never had a lot of stamina. Um, for that level, of course. For the other level, it was okay, but at the international level, you fight with people that are very good in everything. So I couldn't. I was wrong to try to change my fighting style and switch to something that I couldn't cope physically. So also when I was beginning with sense that you can change a bit, but you have to optimize what you can do because there's no way with training you can change the way you are. If your aerobic capacity are limited, you can improve, but you train harder to reach to be not even close to other athletes that they have for genetics different stamina. So I'm not saying you don't have to train, you can, but this can should be considered in your fighting style.
Yeah.
And this is but this is important because this happened in several sports like I work also with team sports. Maybe the coach decide to buy a player because they like technically, and they want to use the player in a position where they have, for example, to run a lot. And we test the athlete and say, look, this is not going to work. This athlete, this player, has no capacity to do this kind of physical activity. So, well, we train. So, no, you can't train. I mean, it's slow. You can make less slow, but can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah,
I think we're back.
yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem. No, so I was just saying that sometimes coaches they think they can change the profile of athletes, but you can improve some aspects, but you can't change. So if you need a fast player, you need to buy in professional setting to buy a fast player. If he's slow, he will never be a fast player. And spending time to make someone zero point 0.5 seconds faster, I know a lot of people say it can make a difference. I don't think it can make a difference. Um, but in general, I think that the coaching style and the way you coach should be created around the characteristic of the athletes. You can't pretend they compete like you would, which is actually what I had to learn when I start coaching because I pretended they could do the same I was doing, but they are different. They are different people. They cannot do. They don't want to do it. So you have to understand where they are good and try to adapt and improve some aspects. That's the way I see coaching. Of course, it's an opinion. We are. It's not. I don't think. Job would say there's some scientific support on what I'm saying, but I'm speaking now based on my experience, and I'm just telling what I used to do as a coach. I could never change. I try, but I never succeed in changing the characteristics. So you should understand the characteristics of the athlete. But this is I have seen the same in other sports. I also work with winter sports, and I train personally a snowboarder that actually participated to 2 Olympic Games, and she was very strong. I trained strength for a lot, and she was very strong. And she was good. And when the piece was hard and icy, because it's where you can use your strength and less, whereas where it was too technical. And I said, well, you're strong. You have these characteristics, and people say maybe you have to make it better from a rugby perspective. So, well, we can try. I know she will never be much better, so I prefer to make her stronger. I know there's more margin there. So sometimes you have to adjust also the physical training in this way. And for example, I said I don't want to train too much the aerobic components because I that's the risk benefit, the cost benefit, because I want her um, fresh and not too fatigue for the technical part. So we had some days off for the physical part and some days on the snow, and this is was how the that was the structure of the training, and for logistical reason it couldn't be different. So I said, okay, I don't want to have her too tired to compromise the benefit of technical training, so the techniques. And yeah, this is the balance, and this is how sometimes you pick one training over the other, not because in general these components are not important, but you have to contextualize everything. This is how I use the studies. I don't say, oh, they train, let's say, snowboarder, and they are better in this and that. So, okay, they train with this method. This method seems to work, but it doesn't fit my athlete. So I have to use something else, regardless the fact that there was a study on snowboarding showing that this can be an effective on snowboarder, because my focus was not on aerobic components, but was more on strength component. For others, was the opposite, for example. So the use of the literature, first you need to understand whether a study is good enough to be considered. Even when it's good enough, you have to contextualize to your situation. If you are not an academic where your goal is just to produce a new paper, but if you are a practitioner, you have to contextualize it. You don't have just blindly use something you read on a paper. It's like this exercise it seems to be better than the other. Yes, but my athlete hates this exercise. What do I do?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to tell them to do it. Yeah, that's the bullshit. This is not how I do. For example, I try to find among the exercises that I think can be benefit, the one that are also are that the others like, and this allow me to increase the load, for example, because doing something you like and you feel comfortable, it's much easier to increase the load than pushing or forcing them to do something they don't like. Of course, sometimes I have to do it, but you have also to find the strategy to make this exercise something they like.
Yeah.
So all these kind of things. So there's no, it's not only a matter of understanding if there is a study showing something works, but also how to contextualize you. And you don't find this on the paper.
Yeah, I think that that point gets lost a lot in my sport, especially when it comes to like the skill acquisition topic, where most jiu-jitsu schools, most Brazilian jiu-jitsu schools are commercial schools that are like majority recreational practitioners who just train because they love the sport and they enjoy it. And most jiu-jitsu is taught in like a classroom format. So like 20 something people on the mat, everybody's,
Yeah,
so individualized approaches, like, there's ways for an instructor to connect to individuals separately, but there's also a lot of like group instruction time and group practice time. And one of the things that I see happen sometimes is I'll see people fall in love with a certain approach, like constraints led approach or differential learning or even like, what's it called? Deliberate practice or like, some sort of approach. And because the instructor falls in love with that approach, they believe the body of research behind it, they'll, sort of do all of their classes that way, which is cool if that works for them. But then I find what happens is that, there's a lot of students that don't like training like that. There's some students that don't like training in a traditional approach where there's like technique and then, some sort of like small sided game and then
yeah,
games. And then there's some students like just doing only live work. Some like doing some rote repetition and explicit instruction. And, so you're dealing with a mixed bag of students who all have different desires and wants and motivational things that like connect to them. And I think the big challenge for a school owner in a commercial school is to be able to help everybody and provide something for everybody that'll keep the whole group motivated. And it's a challenge to not fall in love with any one approach and try and force that approach onto everybody because everybody's so
yeah,
different.
yeah. That's, you're touching a very hot topic, um, and that's something I discuss a lot with job constraint-led approaches or other approaches. Well, first of all, sometimes if you see the outcome of these approaches, is not actually different, too much different from what coaches were already doing. It's a matter of quantity. They maybe some approaches suggest to do some more of something than than other than other, let's say, exercises. But this is where I'm a bit disappointed sometimes. It seems we are relabeling things that have been done for years just under another name. Um, but uh, since I still have my coach perspective, so sometimes I read things that said, "Yeah, actually, this is 50 years we are doing that." So, but they present like something new, and most of the time, it's not that is new what you're doing; is new the explanation of what you're doing, which is okay, but still, I'm doing the same as before. And this explanation being reverse engineering explanations, which is actually the first step in the research process and the scientific process. But after they need, uh, um, you have to try to falsify some components. But this is where, when I start to speak with Job, the good thing is that since I don't come from skill acquisition, for me was and still is new. Everything is new. So, for example, we were discussing about retention test, transfer test. So, and I asked, "Can you explain me why you normally do that?" I said, "Well, that's actually how we commonly do that." Said, "Yeah, but I don't understand why." And they tried to explain why. I said, "But what is this? Where is this connection? Do you have evidence of this connection?" And sometimes it comes out that is more a tradition. Also in research, there are traditional things that you have done. And when you go back to understand where this tradition started, it didn't start from an evidence or a strong evidence. Sometimes it's just someone wrote a sentence in the method section, a second paper mentioned that paper, and it became an established thing, but in reality, it was never. It was just an opinion of someone. Um,
And somebody
and
saw it and then they fell in love with it. And
yeah, but it's plenty. Actually, with some people I know, we want to write something about this. But the point is that working uh, with Job, I think was good for both because I learned so much from Job. But I was also naive enough to ask simple questions that probably people in the area don't ask because they consider established. And Job had to provide an answer. And the good thing of Job is that after he go on thinking and thinking, and maybe he comes back and say, you know what, I told you that, but actually there's not a lot of evidence. He start to question his own beliefs. And this is why I think Job is is one of the smarter researcher I know, because he questions his own beliefs. He doesn't say, no, we always did that. This is how it works. Is when I ask a question, even if he has an answer after he go on thinking and thinking, and maybe he comes back and say, you know what, I'm not sure about what I told you. Maybe it's not like that. And he start to reanalyze the literature, all these kind of things.
I have a lot of
Of
respect.
course, this is not very, to be honest, that is not very smart from our side. It's much better, and it would be easier to make claims, to spin results, to create expectation that would generate much more visibility, popularity, all these kind of things. In the end, it's based on your how you are as a person. Now we are uncomfortable, and I always say I don't want to do it, especially because if I do it, I know I can do very well. Because when you know the literature and you know research method, you can use that knowledge to spin things as you want. And this is what scare me. So that's why I'm becoming even more extreme uh, in my view of research quality, because I don't want to to be caught in that trap. Um,
But that's what makes me so interested in what you and Job have to say, and why I love talking to Job so much because, and I'm enjoying talking to you as well because, that kind of honesty is really rare in jiu-jitsu too, and it's, for me as somebody who's trying to learn how to appreciate science and how it relates to my sport, it is such a pain in the ass to try to, like, navigate through this minefield of, like, misleading information and people exaggerating claims and, not knowing if this guy is, like, telling me something that is accurate or inaccurate or whatever. It's just so hard to find, like, honest people who will tell you the truth even if it costs them, maybe some commercial success or something like that, you know?
Yeah, there is two levels of reading and communicating things, and this is why I'm very critical with scientists, sports scientists, because let's say you read a paper published in a very high journal, a systematic review with a meta-analysis, which is good because you are trying to to base on what you're doing on evidence, so that's good. But you may not have the knowledge to understand, for example, if a meta-analysis is done properly or not. But the fact that you are following that meta-analysis is not bad. Actually, you're trying to do your best. So this is the responsibility of the people running, conducting, and writing the meta-analysis to communicate the correct information. So that's why I think researchers should be much more accountable for what they write, also when they write wrong things. And that's why I'm critical with my area, because if you are a researcher in search for visibility and popularity, maybe on social media, and you start to, you know, manipulate the information, you're doing a damage, because people are going to use what you are saying. This is appeal to authority, but appeal to authority is a bias, but is also something that it's okay to do it. When you have a problem, medical problem, you go to a doctor, so you are appealing to the authority of the doctor. You don't ask you don't ask questions to understand the level. You just say, okay, I go to the doctor. If I come to you and I ask, I need something about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I ask you, I'm appealing to your authority. So appeal to authority is not wrong per se. It may be wrong in some situation, but most of the time is the only thing you can do. So you have the authority as a researcher to provide information to people that are going to use, they are going to trust you, because, and you can't say, yeah, but that's appeal to authority, so it's wrong. No, it's right. What do they cannot be, they cannot spend their life just to understand how to read research. They should be in a position where when they read the research in a journal, they should know that more likely than not, everything that is needed to be reported and in a transparent way is there, so they can make a decision. That's the responsibility of researchers. That's the way I see it. So I always try to explain, if you smell something, there are some things that I call the smell test. When you read the paper, that they say, yeah, there's something here that it doesn't sound right. And that's the only thing you can do. I say, follow your instinct sometimes because it works. But this is a problem from the researcher side, because they shouldn't hide the problems on their study. I know they want to publish, they need to publish several times, most of the times, but they cannot hide the problems of the studies. If you have a study with 10 and 10, which is actually a limitation, there's no doubt there's a limitation. There's no way scientifically to say, no, it's not a limitation. Just write the limitation and say, yeah, it seems we found something, the sample is small. Maybe we may be wrong. So when you use this information, please consider this. And that would be much better. So people cannot use that paper to tell you, oh, gosh, you see, you are doing wrong. This is the study saying you have to use this method because it works. Because the study would say, yeah, it may work. We are not sure. There is a lot of uncertainty. We may be wrong. So it can be used in that way. Because you can say, well, it's written by the authors that there is some uncertainty in the results, for example. So the abuse of science start from the lack of transparency and rigor from the researchers. And this is where I'm trying with Job to work to sensitize our area to the importance of how we communicate scientific findings. We don't have to hide problems. We have just to be open and leave the people to decide. But we need to provide all the information so that they can decide. And this is what I don't like. It's like probably also in your area, some people approach coaching using a model, a theory, and all the others doing something different are stupid. You have to do that. Well, not really. Maybe you can't exclude that you are wrong. Maybe you are wrong, and by say, yeah, but there is science. But yeah, maybe the science is not that strong as you think. So it's okay. Do what you want. Do what you want. It's fine. It's your life. It's your gym. It's your don't. You can say, I think you should do that because this is the reason. But you can't blame people for doing something different unless there is really strong evidence that is wrong in that case. But there are very few situations in which there is evidence that what people are doing is wrong. So just stick with your perspective. It's fine. Don't pretend to impose your to others. You can explain. We can start to chat and you explain why you're doing, what's the reason. We can focus on the outcome and say, well, actually, we are doing the same just for different reasons, for example. So the discussion, the conversation change to other aspects. The constraint led approach, there are things that are logical, mainly logical, but it's becoming a dogma.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's wrong. I think it can also produce good results. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's becoming dogmatic because it's not that strong as people may think, scientifically speaking. And I don't care when they say, yeah, but there are these studies, these other. Yeah, they made a career, an academic career behind that. So they are biased. So, but don't rely on the fact that someone's saying they are right. Let's focus on the reason why they say they are right. That's the important thing. And if you go in depth of that, most of the time you see that the scientific evidence behind some parts of the claims are not that strong, which is fine. This is s- s- often happen in science, but acknowledge that. Otherwise, people think that this is solid evidence, and they can tell you it's not solid evidence at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I see in my sport, one of the good things about jiu-jitsu is that overall the culture of jiu-jitsu is pretty cynical. And so people like there are a lot of people who are overzealous about constraints-led approach and ecological dynamics and sort of fall into that pattern that you described of like, acting like everybody else is stupid and they don't know what they're doing and this is the way, this is the future, blah, blah, blah. And like, I've seen a bit of that before from other groups in my sport, but usually what happens is people who make those kind of claims, at first people will listen, but eventually jiu-jitsu people are cynical enough where they're like, all right, whatever. Like, you like maybe some of what you're saying is good, but those loud voices tend to fizzle out over time. And then the good things that they're saying tend to like get woven into the fabric of the sport. And the things that are either not so good or overclaimed, tend to get dropped and not really paid attention to anymore. So like I think time tends to fizzle those guys out a little bit. But I think, um, I think that's what a lot of people have a problem with that particular group is just not just them, but like anybody who claims that what they're doing is way better than what everybody else is doing and that you're stupid if you don't follow this approach,
Yeah.
I think turns a lot of people off. And especially, like you're saying, if there's no clear evidence of it scientifically and there's not evidence of it in the results of the actual sport. So, you know,
Yeah,
eventually,
but I have seen this in several areas like velocity based training or hip thrust, these kind of things. They are all tools, in my opinion, that can be used, but they are nothing more than tools. And and they are not only the only tool you can use. The problem is that something I teach to my students is the Occam razor. So you have an outcome and you try to explain in some ways. But I can try or I can be successful, succeed in explaining the same phenomenon using a theory that is much simpler. So, and this is a red flag. When you see a theory that start to have too many, is becoming too elaborated, normally this is the sign that the theory has been adjusted to for example, um, part of the outcome that they couldn't be explained. So every time they add a piece to adjust, that's why is not even don't even consider a real scientific theory, because a theory is a theory is and you and is it done in a way that they have a clear prediction and you can test the prediction. Otherwise it become murky a bit, and this you are decreasing the level of falsification, and that's not good in science. But the Occam razor suggests that when you have two explanations, it's better to pick the one that has the same explanatory power but with less elements. And I agree with that. So when people explain me some theories, I normally ask, but do you need something so complicated? Because the explanation may be much easier. And I agree that no, most of the time the easier explanation is likely to be the closest to the correct one. And because you can create a philosophy behind some training, or you can just say, to become better in a sport, you have to do the sport. So just do it, and it's done without creating. You can explain scientifically, and Job, for example, can explain what I just said scientifically, um, instead of creating all these theories that most of the time are not even scientific theories, because they are so vague that they cannot be falsified. They 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 are vague, and this is actually exactly what you don't want to do in science. So I'm not criticizing the specific theory, I'm just talking in general. There are theories that are created to accommodate a lot of outcomes. These are not cannot be considered scientific theories. Is as simple as that. Again, you need to be careful. You always need to consider that you may be wrong. If you have always your mind that you may be wrong, this soften a lot the things that you are going to say, that your attitude and your behaviors. I know that today, especially because everything moves around social media, this is not what is will give you visibility. I know firsthand, because when I start to I question a metric in sport, and initially I approach in a positive way. I say, well, I appreciate what they have done, but probably, and people didn't give a shit. So I was frustrated a couple of times. I posted some more aggressive at the time tweets, and immediately they got traction. So this is actually what I did on purpose. I spoke with here are some colleagues. I said, you know what? I have to slow down the production of studies in that area. People don't care about the quality. they care more. They want to avoid to be called out, to have issues. So I'm going to be aggressive for a while and actually it worked. It perfectly worked. The problem is that um, people start to think I'm, too aggressive, and also my universe said, "Yeah, this message." Said, "No, I know, but I'm doing on purpose." It's funny because people wrote me in DM saying, "Oh, it seems you are really pissed off." I said, "No, I'm not. Actually, I'm here. I'm preparing the pizza and while tweeting."
Yeah.
Yeah, but you look pissed off. I say, no, I'm just doing. I want to look pissed off to give visibility, but I'm not. I don't care.
Yeah.
After that, I actually after that I also move a bit away from social media because they are very toxic environment, and it's a bit dangerous. But anyway, it was just to say that sometimes you need to use techniques. Is like in a competition.
Yeah.
I decide to use a technique. I know it works, and actually it worked. um, but it's a bit dangerous, and I think people are caught in this when they go out strong. They start to have visibility because they polarize the opinion, and at some point they are actually slave of themselves because they cannot go out from these mechanisms, from this process. They see that it works. They are getting visibility. People are starting to say, "Oh, you're great. You're the best. I always said that." And psychologically, you feel rewarded. And what I say normally, and you're fucked. At that point, you're fucked
Yeah.
because you start to lose uh, your critical skills. This is cognitive dissonance. The more you associate yourself with something, the more cognitive dissonance you have if something question what you have so strongly promoted and proposed. So I think that's not a scientific problem. It's a psychological, eventually, problem, sociological problem.
Yeah.
And you can't address this from a scientific perspective. That's why I often move away from these discussions. I had some actually discussion with gurus at some point. It's okay. I'm done. You know the Brandolini's law? Yeah, Brandolini's law is a funny law. It's the academic version of another theory. And I tell you the other theory because I like it more. Is the theory of the pile of shit. Basically, the theory says that the shit that the bullshit that people can produce is the level of bullshit produced is higher than your ability to shovel away. Um, Basically means that you're going to lose that fight because every time you question an argument, providing solid evidence and things like that, and solid evidence, they introduce a new issue. So they say, there is this study. You say, well, this study, I check, I read the study, I can show you that it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And they say, yeah, but there is also this other study. The problem is that every time to question, since you want to do things properly, every time you question, you are putting some effort. So you go to check there to read it. You read other literature, or so you elaborate an answer which is stronger from a logical that in which you invest much more time than the person invested to just say that.
Yeah.
So 10 seconds of, oh, but there is this, took you 2 hours to read it because maybe you didn't read the study. So you have to read the study. So what is the study? Maybe you see the study actually is not saying what they are saying. You say that and they say, yeah, but there is also this other study. So you go, there's no way you can win, meaning that you will invest too much time. You are not going to win the argument. You are not going to convince anyone. You are just investing too much time. So you can do it, but at some point you have to move away and leave it. That's so don't engage
Yeah,
too much.
there's definitely, I think, a certain amount of discipline that one has to have to like know when to just call it quits. Like, I'm going to get involved in this discussion and I'm going to talk this through, and maybe I'll read some of those studies and I'll spend a couple hours doing this. But once it reaches a certain point, like, all right, I'm out. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah,
It,
that's I'm not saying that I'm very good. I learned to do that. I was very engaged in this kind of discussion in the past, but I realized that theory that was actually developed for fun, I said, yeah, actually it's true. Actually it's true because it's um
this is brand new.
it's too much. Yeah, there's no way you can win that argument with this person because they don't care basically. They just create every time a new argument, a new thing. So it never ends. You may convince someone reading. This is why I start to engage a bit at the beginning, and after I just give up. And people may decide by themselves. That's I don't give the name, but I had actually very bad exchange with some very famous people in the US. Um, but I say, okay, I'm done. They have their followers. It doesn't work. I mean, it's not even a conversation. You want to keep your authority over your followers, and so you can't accept criticism and things like that, even if they write bullshit.
Yeah.
And even if I approach in a very polite way, say, yeah, but actually, this is not exactly what the paper was saying, and they react very bad, and they are the followers, they don't understand anything, and say, yeah, you don't know who is. Yes, I know. That's what I'm saying. I'm thinking he doesn't understand what he's talking about. So yeah, that's a bad mechanism. So the point in our conversation is that you have to use your logic. You don't have to follow blindly any method because these create the dogmas. Just being open, adjust to your context, and always remember that what they are telling you may be wrong, but also what you think may be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's that uncertainty is something. So like, I mentioned to you before that I'm a layperson when it comes to this stuff. And so I kind of look for these like little heuristics like, all right, well, you know, if there's all this scientific research and there's all these researchers or people that have written books or people that have done podcasts or whatever that I could listen to, like, how do I know what to listen to, who to listen to, whatever? And one of the heuristics that I kind of settled on is like how uncertain do they sound? Like, do they sound super confident about what they're saying, or do they admit a certain amount of like uncertainty? Do they speak very carefully about what they're discussing? Like it's I think it sounds like a really basic, simple thing, but that's how I've found some of the best people that I've been able, like, for example, Job. I mean, like when I talk to Job, he's very careful about how far he reaches with the stuff that he says. And he doesn't come across as like a super like, he's not going online and making like bold proclamations about, what this research says and what that says. He's very careful about how far he reaches with his words. And that's one of the things that made me really want to listen to him, because to me that's a dead giveaway of somebody who's maybe more trustworthy, is just how uncertain they sound.
Yeah, that's. I mean, is I understand it's not easy to navigate this kind of environment nowadays, but yes, your approach makes sense. If someone looks too convinced and too certain, again, that's a red flag. That, because the more you know, this is what I learned with the research. I start to do research to have this clear answers. And I realized the first point was that you always find study supporting or supporting. So I said, how do I balance that? So I start to learn and study meta-analysis. I realize if you study properly, because people run meta-analysis without studying, but if you study, uh, especially with very good people, you understand how difficult it is, how many limitations there are, all these kind of things. So you start not to trust blindly also meta-analysis, but you start to read it to see if there are issues with this meta-analysis. So the more you do, the less you rely on studies, single studies, but you become more critical. And this this is why today I accept the uncertainty of the training process or the coaching process. That's There are a lot of unknowns there, and it is what it is. So if someone is too convinced about what they are doing, it's fine, as long as they don't want to convince the others that what they are doing is right. This is where I can actually engage with people. Um, but the science told me that uh, the, every uncertainty is everywhere. So if you are a good scientist, you can reduce this uncertainty. You cannot eliminate. You cannot have a certainty. It's always a probabilistic thing. The, in my opinion, the best suggestion I can provide to people is to always balance the cost and benefit. What if it's wrong? What if it doesn't work? What if it's actually produced the other effect, the opposite effect? And what are the benefit if it's right? If the benefit balance out the potential costs, you can do it. At that point, however, is not based on the fact that you are sure that this is working.
Yeah.
Your decision is informed and has already balanced the possibility that is wrong. Because in some situation you may say, yeah, I do it. In some situation you may say, no, I don't want to risk that. I try to find something else where this balance is more positive in terms of benefit.
Makes sense.
So if you only think about risk benefit and you really focus on the risks, I think the way you read the literature, you apply the literature, you apply the methods, they change a lot. Yeah, that's
Mm.
uh,
That's
that's
great
my final
advice.
message.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I really, I do appreciate you taking the time. I mean, we've been talking for about 2 hours, and I don't want to keep you any
Yes,
longer. Um, but it's really been fun talking to you. And uh, the one thing I forgot to mention is that I really like the artwork behind you, like all the Star Wars pictures you have. It's so cool. Especially, I love it.
that's my nerdy part.
Very cool. I should have asked you about that earlier. But yeah, maybe next time we'll talk about Star Wars. Um, but anyway, like
Well,
I is
I'm
that
I'm a Star Wars and Star Trek. I'm a nerd from that aspect. So if you want to talk, we can. And
okay? All right, yeah. So
yeah,
next time I'll hit you up and we'll talk. We'll just talk about Star Wars, Star Trek, all the good stuff. Um,
absolutely.
yeah. All right, brother. Well, I really, I do appreciate you taking the time and being generous with your time and also rescheduling after last week. And
No, don't worry. It's a real pleasure, and thank you again for having me. And I hope I didn't come out too boring, but I mentioned this at the beginning. I'm not the kind of engaging person for podcasts, but yeah, I just
nah,
tell
you were
what I
great.
think.
Yeah, you were super fun to talk to. I think you were great. Um, yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff in this. So, um, all right. Well, I'll
Perfect.
stop taking up your time. It was good meeting you.
Yeah.
And
Thank you very much, Josh. We stay in touch. Yeah. And we go on with the conversation.
all right, sounds good.
Okay.
Have a nice night. Okay.
Thank you. Bye. Bye
Bye.
bye.